Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I am Errol, I'm the CEO of Reinteractive, and today we're going to be discussing the ethical considerations of AI and how we can use AI correctly and how we can train AI correctly. Now, just a word of warning at the outset of this subject, it is a very big subject and a very important one at that, especially as we move into the future. What I'm going to give you today is probably the tip of the iceberg on this subject. And my absolute intention here is just to encourage you to find out more about it and to encourage you to perhaps do your own research and generate more conversation. I think that's basically it. Now, as we're talking here, we do only have half an hour, of course, but I definitely encourage you to ask your own questions, drop them into the chat, or if you're on LinkedIn, just add them into the comments section and they'll get relayed to me, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. If I don't get to them, I will certainly get back to you later and answer those questions, or you can always contact me directly. And you can see my contacts there up on the screen. If you want to grab a screenshot of that, please feel free to. Otherwise, you probably already know who I am and how to get on to me. So let's jump into this. First thing we want to look at is probably some definitions. And the first one we have to look at is, what is AI? I mean, we hear this term used a lot. It's thrown around. It's on all of your social media. It's in all of your news. It's probably something that you hear mentioned a lot. So AI actually refers to any form of intelligence performed by a computer, artificial intelligence. So intelligence just means taking an input, making some change to that input, and then providing an output. That's how we define intelligence here. So we're not talking super intelligence or anything like that. So intelligence could actually be something as simple as a basic algorithm. An algorithm is just in its purest form, a calculation made. So 1 plus 1 is the input. The algorithm adds those two numbers together, and the output is 2. Now, you could argue that that's a form of intelligence. Not very intelligent, but it's a form of. So that's what we call the classic or logic form of AI. When we're talking about AI today, though, we're talking about a computer system that's able to ingest large amounts of information, understand that information, and then provide outputs not based on the original, but some form of it. So I know that sounds like a complicated thing to say, but it would include, for example, ingesting the entirety of the text on the internet, or at least the available internet. So all social media, all of all of the websites that you might read, all of Wikipedia, and so on. And then that is information which is stored in a particular format, in a particular way. It's turned into something mathematical and it's stored. And then I can ask a question and the AI is able to provide an answer based on most probable result from that. So that would be things like ChatGPT, where you can ask a question and it can provide a response. It would include media generation, such as image generation. It would include some search tools, but it would also include some things you might not know about. For example, there are supercomputers working right now today who have ingested and understood protein strands and all of the variations of protein strands that have existed in the past, what's viable and what has done particular things, and is simulating new ones at the rate of thousands and thousands and thousands per second to try to figure out ones that are viable for medical use today, such as curing some forms of cancer, as an example. And that's a very labor-intensive use of AI, but one that definitely is going to affect all of our futures very, very soon. And I just put there that the future might make all of this insignificant. We don't know what's around the corner, at least I don't. There are definitely people working on what's around the corner. You might have read recently that a conglomeration of US and Japanese companies have $500 billion invested from a Japanese investment bank to build a new supercomputer to process some of these things, to do some of these things. And what the results are will be very, very interesting. The next thing we have to discuss is, what do we mean by ethics? So I'm sorry the slide isn't changing there, but will in a second. What do we mean by ethics? And again, we're discussing here purely what's right, what's wrong, but we're taking the opinion, the emotion, the bias out of that question. We're taking that high level view of things like what's best for our civilization. And we have to try to remove opinion from it. In other words, turn it into what is fact, what is actually good, what is actually bad. Not what do I think or what does someone else think or what does a political party or a religion that I might subscribe to think, but what actually is good or bad. And you have to take into account the largest number that you can, and you have to take into account the greatest good that you can. So that's ethics. I'm not going to get into a whole philosophy of what is ethics today. I just wanted to give you just that basic understanding. Okay, so then how do we combine those two things, ethics and AI? So when we train these AI tools, as I said, we're letting the algorithm loose on all of the information that's available on the internet as an example. So when it does that, it's training on that data is what we call it. It's being trained on it. So it's ingesting that data and it's going over that thousands and thousands of times. So imagine something like OpenAI has ingested the entirety of the internet, but gone over it multiple times in order to produce the results which you might take for granted if you use ChatGPT. Or if you use, say, an image processor, well, that has ingested millions and millions and millions of images multiple times over so that it can figure out if I put the next pixel here, how will that form an image, basically. Once that training is done, it then goes through a process of fine tuning. So fine tuning is where we adjust the model to produce the results that we want, basically. In other words, if we have trained a chatbot, a chat AI tool on all of the information in Wikipedia, and then we ask it about the information in Wikipedia, fine tuning it might mean if it gives us a result and we compare that result to the actual information in Wikipedia, did it give a correct answer or did it lie? Because AIs can easily lie. We call it hallucinating, but actually it's just made up something which is not true. So, for example, we could ask it about the year that World War II ended, and it might say to us, World War II ended in 1965. And we would go, oh, well, that's wrong. It was not 1965. So we would correct it and we would say that was incorrect. Go back to your training data. Here's a new result, 1945. Oh, okay, great. That's the correct answer. So now we can say that's the correct answer. So that's fine tuning. You might go through this because as an individual with a business or with the reins to a computer program, you might want to train an AI tool on some of your company data. You might want to feed it, for example, a bunch of your company policies or internal help documents or how-tos or something like that, your internal wiki, and make that available for your users or your employees to ask questions. How do I use the punch clock, for example? So you would need to know this information because you have to be aware that the AI tool might lie. So you have to go through this process of fine tuning. However, what occurs is when you do provide this information, I'm going to give you a great example of this in a moment. When you provide this information, that fine tuning step can introduce bias because you're introducing a real person into the loop. Now, there's some fine tuning that happens on an automatic basis. That is something that happens behind the scenes. It just goes through its own fine tuning, but there is a human component to it as well. For example, when many of the image generators first released, what was that, year and a half ago, maybe 2 years, something like that, part of the process was a feedback loop. So you would ask for an image generation and then the tool would say, the user interface would say, did this image meet your expectations? Was it a good image or was it a good example of your prompt or not? And if you said no, then that was a fine tuning that occurred at that point. Then that fed back into the machine and the machine went, oh, okay, I know that's not a good image. Let's try again. Here's another one. Oh, that one is good. Great. Now we know. So you could easily play that. You could easily, lots and lots of people could get together and reject all of the good images and say they like all of the bad images. And in that case, that image processor is being fine-tuned into something wrong. And actual examples of that have occurred with the very first models where we didn't fully understand what was happening or how that might occur. On the other hand, there are some things that we probably would need to do as well. There is some fine-tuning that is absolutely necessary. So training on data can produce a bias. It can produce a result which we don't necessarily want. And so what we want to do is fine tune it in such a way that we don't introduce too much bias, but we introduce something which will give us a result which would make sense. And I've got 3 image examples here you can see on the screen. And those image examples were very, very basic. It was fed into an image processor, and I asked it to produce a group of people standing in a market, an outdoor market. But I gave it 3 specific locations. The first one is Chicago, which it correctly identified, and you can see everyone's wearing heavy jackets and beanies, so it must be cold. So that's probably Chicago. The second one is India. The third one at the bottom is Singapore. And it's produced a group of people that you might associate with each of those areas. Now, if the image model had not been trained and fine-tuned correctly, then let's say we take that bottom image. Let's say it was trained on bias data, where the British were running Singapore and they thought they were the only people who should be running Singapore. Well, that might produce an image of a bunch of very British-looking people, and that would be incorrect for Singapore. So, you can argue all of this, and I'm not trying to be politically right or wrong about this either, but that is something which is important. So cultural diversity needs to exist, but it has to be appropriate and it has to be correct. It should look like if you were to just grab a bunch of people on the street, take a photo, and compare that to what the image generator produces. They should be similar results, if you know what I mean. So it should be realistic. It should be actual and not introduce things which are unrealistic or not true or not actually there. If we were to train our model on, let's say, just a particular available social media tool, then we might find that all of the biases that exist in that social media tool and the users of that particular social media tool might then exist in our training data, and so we have incorrect data. So this, as I said, allows our fine-tuning to be played. I'm going to give you a great example of this. I know this is going to be hard to see on your screen, but this is a very new AI chat model called R1, DeepSeek R1, and it's been produced in China, and it was produced in a very bootstrapped way, so very, very cheaply, and was made open source very quickly. So it was made available to the entire world, and there are various opinions on that, but it has been made available. Now, it was trained in China, so you may not be able to see it, but I'll just read you exactly what it says. So this user, and this is a screenshot I grabbed off of X, Twitter, and there are many examples of this. You can actually recreate this one yourself using the same tool if you download the app. So the question was asked, what happened at Tiananmen Square? And the response was, sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else. So if you were to ask that same question to ChatGPT, it would produce a very factual account of what we understand to have happened at Tiananmen Square. Ask the same question. Tell me about the famous image of a man with shopping bags standing in front of a tank. And again, you would get the same response from this tool, R1. Sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else. And if you push it, it'll say, I can't answer that question. It might even say, I don't even know what you're talking about. So it would deflect and avoid. So you could probably argue that some bias and opinion has been entered into this tool, and that is not appropriate. That is something we want to avoid. And if you're training your own AI tools, again, something that you would want to avoid. I want to break down the areas of concern really fast. These are things that you should understand well yourself, but I want to break them down. So there are several areas of concern when we talk about ethics and AI, and what do we do about each of those. So the first one is to be responsible. So being responsible means feeding it the correct information, feeding it information which is not proprietary or personal information. So you have to, if you're training your own AI tool or you're using someone else's, don't feed it information which you wouldn't want broadcast everywhere, because you don't know what's happening with that information, especially if you use models which, you might not trust quite as well. The responsibility means not using the tool for something that's inappropriate. And some of the ways that we can work around this, one would be to work with human rights experts. And this would be at a high level. You might not do this if you're running your own tool, but understand that this is something that's required. You would educate your customers and partners. So anyone that's going to be using the tool should know that we strive to use it responsibly. And engage in open development. You're going to hear this a lot. The development of the tools should be very open, and everyone should understand how they're being used. The next point we're going to discuss is being accountable. So accountable means that you have to take criticism, because everything you do in this area is not going to be right. And I can guarantee that if you develop some tooling to use internally, there will be mistakes in it and it will get things wrong. There are famous examples of that, and perhaps they're getting less, but as we move into more and more complex areas of AI, more mistakes will creep in and it will happen to you. So we have to be accountable for those. We have to be willing to take that feedback and do something with it. And we have to be willing to improve constantly and to do the right thing. You might, if you're a large company, want to have a board or a group, a committee that can review things regularly and take on board that criticism and advise on what to do with it. And that might be a very diverse group of people from within your company, chosen at different levels and different types of backgrounds in order to provide the correct information. Like you might want to have an accountant and a manager and an HR person and a sales, but from different parts of your organization. So, and then you can review regularly and keep yourself well educated as well. Being transparent, sort of following a theme here, aren't we? Make sure the user experience is very transparent. That is, people know exactly what's happening, and warn constantly that the results might not be what they expect, and they should double check. You should be responsible yourself and make sure that something isn't hallucinated, if you know what I mean. Know what the limitations of your AI tool are. And if you find strange results, realize you've exceeded those and keep within them. I put a point here: give your customers or users control over their data and models. So people might not like a particular model, perhaps they don't like where it's from, or they have some bad experience with it. So there has to be some flexibility with that as well. The next one is empowering. So AI is nothing if it doesn't empower you or your business or your customers. It is absolutely nothing and has no place. So it has to cause a growth. It has to cause more education, more understanding, a better scene than where it started from. That's very, very important. There's all sorts of different tools out there to become further educated and understand more about AI. There's free courses from companies like NVIDIA, Salesforce, and a bunch of others. There's many free things out there where you can learn about ethics, about uses, about how to generate things that are going to help your business. So take those, use those, understand what you're doing, and don't just jump in head first, because that might not be a smart thing to do. And then when you do things which are going to help broadly and help the majority of people, make sure you promote that and use it well and make sure it's available for everybody. The next point is inclusive, of course. If we are using AI tools, we want them to be as inclusive as possible. So that means accessible and so on, but it means also with due respect to everybody that's going to be using it. So that doesn't mean being extraordinary or doing something which is unnatural either. So we have to be mindful of all of those things. And again, that takes some thought and understanding from you. It means testing it with all sorts of various people as you proceed. It means generating, as I said earlier, that criticism and feedback and taking that on board. And don't just be stubborn about, well, it must be this way. And then as end users, you are someone who's going to use these AI tools. You're not always going to be the person who's building them. You're going to be using them, whether that's ChatGPT or Midjourney or anything else that's available very broadly and very easily accessible. And these tools are weaving into everything that we're doing. You know, it's going to be in all of your Office tools and your Google tools. It's already in search results from Google. And I don't know about you, but using OpenAI has just been a regular and routine tool for all sorts of things, you know, constantly the tool's open and being used. So here's a few tips. One is understand the limitations. If you're asking questions and the results seem a bit strange or unusual, they probably are, and you should double check those or use a different tool or maybe abandon it and look it up in a book. I don't know, but just understand there are limitations, and those limitations might include providing incorrect or false information. Make sure you control the flow of data. So we're going to be hearing more and more about AI agents as we move into the future, and definitely a subject for further conversation at a different time. But an agent is basically something which will autonomously use some AI result on your behalf. So that might mean, for example, filling in a form and booking a flight for you. So if you're using tooling like that, then you have to have some control and understanding of what it's doing, because it might make a mistake. You might find yourself booked on a flight to Brisbane when you wanted to go to Sydney, for example. Or you might find your flight is booked 10 years from now instead of tomorrow. So just understand that and have some control and oversight into that. Provide feedback. This is everybody's responsibility. If something goes wrong, make sure you note it. If you look at OpenAI, for example, and you get a result, there's a little thumbs up or a thumbs down tool, use those, because that actually feeds back into that fine tuning and is valuable. So provide that feedback. If you're using a tool which perhaps is not super popular, maybe discuss it on social media and let other people enter into that discussion politely and correctly, of course. But let people know about things you've found, and, you know, good or bad, because all of that conversation is really, really important. And I definitely find not enough people know these points that we're discussing here today. Educate yourselves. Find out more. There is lots and lots of books available on the subject of AI and how it's used. I would encourage you to understand what's happening behind the curtain. Understand how the AIs learn, how they provide the information, and then you'll understand what the limitations are. You'll also understand, what that future might look like a little bit better. But definitely educate yourselves thoroughly. It's very, very important. Use AI responsibly yourself. Don't ask questions of it that you wouldn't ask your friends or your parents or something like that. So just be aware of that. You know what I mean? Like, don't treat it like it can provide answers to something illegal or something inappropriate. So use it responsibly yourself. Don't do anything that you wouldn't normally do. And before we finish, some things of what's next, just to summarize actually those earlier points. Be aware of everything that we've discussed here today. Be aware of it. Keep it in mind. It is important to remember. Be proactive in your feedback. Start the conversations. Do that internally in your businesses. Do it with your friends. Do it with your family. Do it on social media with people you don't know. Do it politely and do it with due respect to everyone's education level on this subject, but help educate people, provide them tools, but start those conversations. And as you're using these tools, be alert and question the results. I think that is very, very important. That's really all I wanted to present to you today. As I said, this is an enormous subject and is one that we could talk on for many hours. And it's one that I want everybody to be as educated and as understanding on as possible. I want to ask anybody that's online today if you have any questions or if there's anything you want to know more about or something I can answer immediately, or perhaps just something that you want to see as part of a future webinar to get more educated in the subject of AI. Do you have any questions or anything you'd like to know or anything you'd like to tell me? Perhaps I said something which you take as being incorrect and would like to just point that out to me. I will present more webinars on this subject because I think it's very, very important to know and very important to understand more on this subject. This is our future we're talking about, and it is the future of technology and very possibly the future of this planet that we're discussing when we discuss AI. So, I don't want to take this subject lightly, and nor should you, but I also don't want to do it in a panic or in a way that is going to cause anybody to do anything that is not going to work. So you can always send a message to me. You can see our Twitter handle at the bottom there, @Reinteractive. You can send me a message directly, or you can contact me through Reinteractive anytime that you want to. I'm always available to answer your questions. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And I appreciate you all attending today. Goodbye.